We are taught a very simple story about how banks work. You walk in, ask for a loan, and they hand you money that someone else deposited for safekeeping. Under this assumption, the bank is just a neutral middleman, moving existing savings from one person to another. But if you look at the actual mechanics of a modern loan, that narrative falls apart. When you sign a contract for a $10,000 loan, the bank does not move existing funds from a vault. They simply type $10,000 into your account. Your signature on that contract created the money out of thin air. Because of how this creation process works, the money in your pocket is quietly bleeding away. This chart shows the purchasing power of a single US $100 bill over the last 50 years. Since 1971, the number printed on the paper has stayed exactly the same, but the actual value it holds has dropped by 92%. To understand why your savings are continuously stripped of their value, we have to trace the mechanics of a specific 17th century London scam and see how broke governments eventually legalized it across the entire planet. The modern banking system runs on an engineered loophole, functioning as a machine designed to extract value through a legally protected process of expansion. Textbooks usually claim money started with barter. The story goes that our ancestors traded fish for bread, found it too complicated, and invented coins to make things easier. But anthropologists have scoured the historical record and found zero evidence of a society built on barter. People only swapped goods directly when their actual monetary systems collapsed. To see how money really started, look at the island of Yap in the Pacific Ocean. They used enormous solid limestone discs as currency. Some weighed 4 tons, the size of an elephant. They were far too heavy to carry or hand over in a marketplace. When someone made a purchase, the stone stayed exactly where it was. The entire village simply agreed that the ownership had transferred. The ultimate test of this system happened when a family was transporting a large stone by canoe and a storm sank it to the bottom of the ocean. Nobody could see or touch it, yet the island continued to use it as money. They all agreed the stone existed and belonged to that family, so the family could spend it. The oldest written records in history are Mesopotamian clay tablets, used to track agricultural debts and promises between neighbors long before the first coins were ever minted. The physical object, whether it was an invisible stone under the ocean or a scratch on a piece of clay, never held the value. The value lived entirely in the community's absolute trust in a recorded agreement of debt. For centuries, people tried to anchor these agreements to something tangible, like gold, to keep the system honest. But carrying heavy metal through dangerous streets was risky, so people in 17th century London started leaving their gold in the secure vaults of local goldsmiths, receiving a lightweight paper receipt in return. Soon, merchants realized it was much easier to just trade the paper. Then, a goldsmith realized a fatal flaw in human behavior. This diagram illustrates what happens inside a vault when people stop asking for their physical assets. Since maybe 10% of people ever return to claim their metal, the goldsmith could secretly print dozens of new paper receipts for gold that did not exist and lend them out to borrowers. Notice the secondary flow of money emerging here. The borrowers paid interest on these fabricated receipts, and all of that profit bypassed the vault completely, landing straight in the goldsmith's pocket. The original depositors took on all the risk of a potential collapse, while the goldsmith kept the rewards. When this massive fraud was inevitably exposed, you might expect the authorities to shut it down. Instead, King William III of England was desperate for cash to fund his wars. In 1694, he gave a group of merchants a royal license to issue paper money backed by his promise to repay, institutionalizing the goldsmith's trick and creating the Bank of England. This printing power was tempting, and eventually the world tried to put a leash on it. Near the end of World War II, international delegates sat down and agreed to tie every major currency to the US dollar and strictly anchor the dollar to physical gold at $35 an ounce. It worked until the physical reality collided with the temptation to print. America started spending heavily on wars and domestic programs, printing vast amounts of paper dollars to cover the gap. Soon, the mountain of paper circulating globally far exceeded the actual physical stacks of gold sitting in the vaults. foreign countries noticed the math didn't add up and started demanding their physical gold back. Facing a rapid drain on the vaults, President Richard Nixon went on television in August 1971 and officially disconnected the dollar from gold. In a single evening, the global economy severed its ties to physical limitations. Every currency on Earth explicitly adopted this 17th century system of generating value entirely from trust and printing it from nothing. Which brings us back to the bank where you sign for a loan. Today, 97% of all money is digital, and it is typed into existence by private banks using the exact same loophole those London merchants discovered. But this creates a terrifying mathematical paradox. This visual breaks down the math of a typical bank loan. In column A, we see the $10,000 in principal that the bank creates from thin air when you sign the contract. But in column B, you owe $11,000 back. That extra $1,000 in interest was never created. It does not exist anywhere in the financial system. Because the interest money is missing, the only way you can pay your debt is if someone else takes out a new, larger loan, dropping more created money into column A to cover the void in column B. The math dictates an infinite loop. Society must constantly take out larger and larger debts to pay off the old ones. Because the money supply must perpetually expand, the purchasing power of every dollar you hold inevitably shrinks. Central banks actually target this engineered shrinkage at a rate of 2% inflation every year. This shrinking ruler is highly advantageous to anyone holding massive amounts of debt. You borrow money when it is strong and pay it back decades later when the currency is weak. And the single largest borrowers on Earth are governments, who hold staggering debts that could never be realistically paid back through regular taxation. When your savings lose half their value over a 35-year career, you are witnessing a functioning wealth transfer mechanism designed to let everyday savers pay for the debts of the powerful.